Alright, so you guys were right. I needed to be a little easier on Ducktales. Because, well, my ideal is... I know I said I wasn't going to bring politics into these anymore, but I don't think economics and politics are intrinsically linked. And this is the last time I'm going to rag on something like this, I promise. At least as a major theme of one of the reviews. Unless I'm given like a really, really, really good reason to, right? Unless it's like necessary. My ideal is that capitalism just wasn't a thing anymore. Because regardless of whether or not it was necessary or beneficial in the past, and I'm not going to argue that it wasn't, I'm not going to get into that, it's not anymore. It benefits some people, but it is harmful to more people than it benefits, and it's just not necessary anymore. And things that are both harmful and unnecessary, I think at most, people should elect into them, and they should be made as unharmful as possible. And just, capitalism doesn't fall under that umbrella. But I will fully concede that a world where capitalism doesn't ruin lives, but still exists, wouldn't be terrible. And this extremely fun and funny and atmospheric and just extremely cool looking in general episode about all of our main characters, including Launchpad. Launchpad got to actually be involved in a plot this time. I was very happy. Getting trapped in a pyramid and discovering that there's still like a semi-functioning ancient Egyptian society in there where the people are basically slaves to their god king was all an allegory for unethical practices in capitalism and how they're bad and we shouldn't stand for them. So, you know, it was superficially all the really cool stuff that I like, but then, like, subtextually all the stuff I like, too. Win-win. I think, frankly, that could be the review in and of itself, but I'm going to talk about the episode more, don't worry. I really liked how everything in this episode fit together so well. It starts with a panning shot of the plane crashed into the Egyptian desert, which already tells you exactly what has happened up to this point, right? Just based on context clues and foreknowledge from past episodes of the show. Which does mean that some of the gags in this one, I guess, don't technically work if this is your first episode of the show, but I think there's plenty of gags in here that would work just fine if it is, so it's fine. Those extra few context-dependent gags are just a nice bonus, a nice cake topper on top of a very tasty cake. We then jump cut to the interior of this pyramid that they have gotten to by clawing through sand that they apparently sunk into outside, which has told us through exposition that's also jokes and funny, which is one of the best ways to do exposition, frankly. And this puts us directly into the action of the episode. We don't need any setup to get us where this episode wants to go, which gives us more time for the good stuff that takes place inside the pyramid. Our heroes are then separated into two groups. Webby and Louie end up in Pharaoh Toth-Ra, who's not an actual pharaoh or Egyptian mythological figure. He's been invented for the show, which is fine. Just, there's so many bird-themed actual Egyptian characters. I don't know why they didn't use one of those, but I'm not salty about it much. They end up in his treasure room while the rest of the party ends up in the main chamber of the pyramid, where there's a civilization of living mummies, living servants. They're the descendants of the original servants of this pharaoh, still living. And, like, yeah, they're speaking modern English and even using modern colloquialisms, and that's goofy. But, like, if I can accept something like that in a show like Stargate, for example, I can accept it in this goofy cartoon for children. And, man, were they endearing, especially the one that mostly interacted with the rest of the group, whose name I cannot remember, and I feel bad for that. She was fantastic. I liked her a lot. I would love to see this character make a reemergence later. She was very funny and charming, and I liked her voice. And when it's revealed just how oppressive this society is towards these people, I do like that Scrooge steps up to try to rally them to stand up to Toth-Ra and claim their freedom. Like, yeah, he does it because he wants their help getting his kids back, but you can tell he and the others are, I mean, except for Launchpad, I guess, because Launchpad's just kind of oblivious to everything all the time, but everybody's pretty at best, put off, and at worst, like, dumbstruck and outraged by how oppressed these people are in a situation where they are overworked and given, in this case, literally nothing, but you could take that as next to nothing, while the guy working them hoards all the wealth for himself and doesn't even have any real power. Like, he's literally the bringer of the sun in their mythology. So, like, the gimmick is that if they please him, he'll open a hole in the ceiling and let the sun in for a little bit, which acts as a perfect metaphor for how long work hours can keep you from experiencing your life outside of work. And giving Scrooge himself some of the lines that decry these allegories for the very worst parts of modern capitalism helped ingratiate the character to me again a little bit, which was very nice. I already suspected that, maybe he's not that worst kind of capitalist. This episode did confirm that for me. Like, he's still hoarding a lot of wealth, but there seems to be just so much wealth in this world. I don't think that's a one-to-one comparison to the thing happening in the real world, right? And to stretch the cake allegory from earlier a little further, this episode was really good at having its cake and eating it too. There's, first of all, a lot of, I won't say Egyptian themed, but like Egyptian movie trope themed comedy in here, first of all. Like trapdoors triggered by hidden buttons and stuff, and ancient sacrificial chambers, things like that. Things that are hokey, but still a lot of fun and worked very well with the aesthetic of this episode. And most of them were delivered by Webby, who is objectively the best character to deliver this kind of stuff. And throughout the episode just continues to be the absolute best. And before you ask, the best in this show or just the best in general? The answer is yes. And while Huey and Dewey didn't really get much to do in the episode, Louie actually learns a lesson. He finally admits to himself that sometimes you can't talk your way out of a situation. You just have to accept your own part in putting yourself in that position. And like, I don't know how this is going to influence his character going forward, but I have faith that it will, and I think that's a good thing for him. But all of that tropiness, all of that funny tropiness actually services the plot too. Like, it's not just there for references and jokes, it services the plot, which is a great example of this episode taking this concept and using it for comedy, but then bringing it back around, which it also does elsewhere too. Originally, the oppressed people, for example, since they don't really have a concept of freedom, just aren't up for revolution. So they pull this gag where Launchpad, who's been eating a burrito throughout the entire episode, eats a burrito in front of them. And they don't know what a burrito is, and after they taste it, now they're fighting specifically for burritos. And the idea of people doing a revolution for Chipotle is funny to me. I don't know exactly why, but it is. And this is a recurring gag up to the point that in the end, the final boss of the episode is defeated by these people using the burrito folding techniques that Launchpad taught them that seemed like they were useless to the planned revolution, which was such a great way to top off the episode. And yet, in the end, when it comes time to actually face off against the real threat, which, like, there's two villains in this. There's one guy, there's a priest guy, or a descendant of the priest anyway, who is using the mummy, Weekend at Bernie's style, as a puppet to control everybody for his own benefit. And then there's the mummy himself, who turns out to actually still be alive, kind of, which I just realized gives the title The Living Mummies of Toth-Ra a double meaning, because that means he's actually technically one of them too. And I kind of read that as like standing up to your boss and then standing up to the concept of abusive capitalistic practices overall. Like, one is obviously less intimidating than the other being changing the whole system permanently, which was very neat. But anyway, in the end, as it comes time to actually face him, they realize they do actually want their freedom, so they're not just doing this for a gag. It's taken seriously by the end. And then the fact that there are two villains, that we get this symbolic villain showing that, no system is ever quite as intrinsic as we're told that it is. and then this more serious villain who's a supernatural threat, the kind of thing that I like to see in a show like this, meant that we got the best of both worlds. Like, I'm predisposed to liking this kind of DuckTales episode better than the other kinds anyway. I've said that before in previous reviews, but this is just a peak example of it. And I haven't even touched on, like, the fact that Dewey and the Mummies do the Thriller dance, for example, right? Or when Louis, as one last bid to get his hands on the treasure, goes into the back room and puppets the Toth-Ra mummy himself to try to trick all the people, which ends up being what causes the mummy to fall across the seal that triggers him to come back to life, which also works as an allegory for how perpetuating the system, even if your cause is better than the last guy's cause, is still harmful. Like, how cool is that? Was funny and also meaningful. Not to mention the familiarity that the characters showed with each other in this one. Like that example I just cited. Scrooge and the others who were separated from Louis and Webby finally enter the room where they've been stuck most of this time, the treasure room. And, like, let's be clear, they already got themselves out of the situation that they were in. They were fine. Up to a point. But he finally gets there and he sees Webby and he's like, oh, where's Louis? And then Louis starts puppeting the thing and talking through it. And Scrooge is just immediately like, oh, never mind. There he is, right? Because these characters understand each other so well. Just so much of the more subtle humor in this one came from the familiarity that these characters have with each other and the understanding of that we, the audience, are expected to have. I'm trying to think of another episode up to this point that does everything that I would want this show to do, and everything that this show has the potential at this point to do as well as this one, and I can't think of one. This is probably my favorite episode of the show so far up to this point. Like, obviously, I haven't seen the rest of the show yet, and there are probably going to be episodes that, like, from an entertainment standpoint are better than this one, but this one just felt like, structurally, a perfect DuckTales episode, if that makes sense. All that said, though, guys, what do you think of the living mummies of Toth-Ra? If you have seen it, let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, and while you're down there, you might as well like the video, share it with anyone else you think would enjoy my content, subscribe if you haven't, and check out my links to my social media and to all the various ways you can help out the channel. Those will be in the video description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.